Our task is not to compare ourselves to others, but to play our own instrument.
Welcome to Prism of Torah with Rebbe Saf Aaron Prisman, engaging Divrei Torah, packed with stories and practical insights. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or at prismoftorah.org.
Shalom uvracha. In one of our Parshas, Parshas Acharei, there's a very interesting service as part of the Yom Kippur service that we know was during the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Part of the service included two identical goats, Shnei Seirim, that despite the fact they looked identical, however, their fates were totally opposite one another. One goat selected by a lottery, the Goral, that the Kohen HaGadol Aaron performed. He did a lottery for each one, and he saw which one is going to Hashem, which means to the Mizbeach, as a sacrifice, and the other was designated for Azazel, which pretty much means it found the end of its life being thrown off a remote desert cliff. Question number one is, why do we require a lottery? Why can't we just choose one seir, one goat, this will go off the cliff, and another goat, this is going to be going on the Mizbeach? Why not simply designate each goat where it goes? And what deeper meaning exists in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Hebrew word Goral, Gimel Vav Reish Lamed, which actually in Lashon HaKodesh means two things. It signifies both lottery and fate. And we know that in Lashon HaKodesh, if the root is the same, then obviously there's a very tight correlation between the two words. How much more so over here that it's the same word itself. It's not just the same root. Goral and Goral. It means also a lottery, and it also means fate. I saw a fascinating insight brought down by the Akedah Sitzchak. He offers an unbelievable insight. And the gist of what he says is the following. We each possess unique spiritual traits, strengths, and of course, inherent limitations. For example, consider two equal young people. Intelligent, both of intelligence, but one is blessed with natural patience. And he can do with all kinds of things. For example, he can learn Torah for hours, or be a doctor performing operations for 10 hours continuously. Is it truly fair and just that both face the same identical spiritual expectations? Similarly, how can we reconcile that some people naturally maintain being calm at all times, no matter what happens, while others struggle to an extreme? We know that they can get angry very easily, despite their very sincere efforts. The pasuk in Dvarim says, "Hatzur tamim po'alo ki chol drachav mishpat," which means the rock, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, perfect is his work. Meaning the true judge evaluates each soul through the prism, excuse the pun, of their individual nature. We do not need to worry that we're being measured against universal standards. No, it's all a function and based on the tools we received, the inherent makeup, the DNA that we got, both spiritual and physical. The judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes this into consideration. It incorporates our unique spiritual starting points, and that is our personal Goral. That is the lottery that we received. That's the deck of cards that we got. What are we going to do with those deck of cards? That is what's important. Of course, it doesn't give us license to surrender to our weaknesses that we inherently got. Rather, the message of the two identical goats, that the starting point is that they look the same, and actually they're only differentiated by the lottery that sealed their fates, is a strong reminder to us that ultimate judgment transcends the surface appearance. It's not based on the surface appearance. It's based on the deck of cards we got, which is like a lottery from our perspective. And on that, we're not going to be judged. We're going to be judged what we did with that lottery. What were we able to accomplish despite or due to the deck of cards we received? Our spiritual journey begins with accepting our individual nature while refusing to be limited by it, but rather trying to grow with the tools we got. Each one understanding he has a unique path. On Yom Kippur, as we contemplate the two goats that are determined by the Goral, by the lottery, we're invited to embrace this paradox that our spiritual destiny is at the same time influenced by factors that are beyond our control. However, it is also profoundly shaped by how we respond to our unique spiritual inheritance. That is exactly why it is so dangerous to look at our fellow Jew and see what he accomplished and compare it to us. He has a different deck of cards. Everyone should take their deck of cards and do the best that they can be with those deck of cards. I would like to end with this unbelievable story that I think will bring the concept to life. The annual Riverdale Music Festival had reached its climatic moment. The Edison Theater's grand hall buzzed with anticipation as the lights dimmed for the final showdown between the last two contestants standing after weeks of extreme competition. The festival, known for launching careers, had narrowed its search from over 300 hopefuls to just two finalists, Dovie Klein and Daniel Levinson. Dovie took the stage first, a confident smile playing across his face. At 23, he carried himself with the polished demeanor of someone already comfortable in the spotlight. His designer clothes and carefully styled hair suggested success even before he opened his mouth. When he began to sing, the audience fell into a reverent hush. His voice soared through the theater, rich, flawless, and captivating. Every note seemed perfectly calibrated, each emotionally swell, precisely timed. The judges nodded approvingly, jotting notes as Dovie's performance built to a spine-tingling, unbelievable music. When he finished, the crowd erupted, several people rising to their feet in spontaneous admiration. Then came Daniel's turn. He shuffled awkwardly onto the stage, fidgeting with the sleeves of his ill-fitting thrift store blazer. At 25, Daniel looked both older and younger than his age, his eyes carrying a wariness the rest of his youthful face hadn't caught up with. Unlike Dovie's commanding presence, Daniel seemed to shrink under the spotlight. His voice, when he began, was good, authentic, but it lacked the polished perfection of Dovie's performance. There were moments of genuine brilliance, raw and unfiltered, but also noticeable imperfections, slight pitch variations, moments where his voice cracked with emotions rather than technical precision. The audience listened respectfully, but the energy had noticeably shifted. The judges' expressions remained neutral, giving nothing away. The voting was hardly surprised. Dovie won by a landslide, capturing nearly 80% of the audience vote and a unanimous support from the judges' panel. The local press labeled him as the next great voice of our generation. While Daniel received courteous mention of the runner-up, the festival ended with Dovie being awarded a recording contract and Daniel fading quickly from public memory. However, the story's not over yet. 3 weeks later, Sarah Klein, a music technology journalist for Soundscape magazine, published an article that sent ripples through the industry. The piece, titled "The Technology Behind the Voice," began. At the beginning of the article, it said a technical breakdown of equipment used by emerging artists. But as readers scrolled deeper, they discovered something remarkable. Sarah had spent days investigating in both finalists' production methods. What she uncovered challenged everything the audience and judges had assumed. Dovie, it turned out, had recorded his competition pieces in a state-of-the-art private studio owned by his uncle, a Grammy-winning producer. His performance utilized the industry's most sophisticated audio engineering software, auto-tune, vocal layering techniques that could transform even a mediocre voice into perfection. His quote-unquote live performances were subtly enhanced by backing tracks in real-time pitch correction through an almost imperceptible in-ear monitor. Daniel's story couldn't have been more different. Unable to afford studio time, he had converted a corner of his bedroom in his parents' basement into a makeshift recording space, using egg cartons and old blankets for soundproofing. His equipment consisted of little more than a second-hand microphone connected to an ancient laptop. Most surprising was his method for practicing and composing. Daniel used an old MP3 player to record his raw vocal takes, listening back to them through its tiny speaker, marking where he needed improvement. Without access to editing software, each recording represented dozens of complete takes until he got one he could live with. The imperfections heard in his performance were actually conscious choices, emotional inflections he'd kept deliberately, believing they conveyed greater authenticity. If we truly compare these artists, Sarah wrote, we must account for the vast disparity in their resources. Dovie's performance was undeniably beautiful, but how much of what we heard was truly him? And how much was technological intervention? Meanwhile, Daniel's seemingly less polished sound represents something far more remarkable. Pure talent, meticulously refined through thousands of hours of practice without the safety net of digital enhancement. As you can imagine, this article sparkled heated debates among the whole industry, including professionals. Several judges publicly admitted they had failed to consider the technological advantages at play. One veteran producer commented, if Daniel sounds that good with practically nothing, imagine what he could create with proper equipment. That's the real talent we should be nurturing. Within days, 3 independent labels had reached out to Daniel, offering development deals that specifically valued his authentic approach. Dovi, meanwhile, faced uncomfortable questions about how much of his sound was manufactured. While his career wasn't ruined, the sheen of invisibility had worn off. I think this story is unbelievable. It teaches us something profound about how we judge others and ourselves. Each person stands on their own unique stage with different tools, different advantages, different challenges. Hashem alone knows the true measure of our efforts because only Hashem sees the complete context of our lives. We cannot judge the quality of another song when we don't know what instruments they've been given to play. Some create beautiful music with the finest equipment, while others produce miracles with barely anything at all. Our task is not to compare ourselves to others, but to play our own instrument, whatever it may be, with all our heart and soul. At the end of the day, in the true judgment day, we will not be asked why we weren't Moshe Rabbeinu, or lehavdil, why we weren't Mozart or Beethoven, lehavdil elef avdalos. But the question we will be asked, and perhaps the movie we will see up there is, did we make the most beautiful music we could out of the instrument that Hashem gave us? Have a good Shabbos.
This concludes another episode of The Prism of Torah. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and give a 5-star rating. You can also find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or our own website, prismoftorah.com, where we have a full archive of all our past episodes. We would like to thank Yona Vefa for the recording equipment and Eli Podcast Productions for handling all our post-podcast productions. Join us next week for another enlightening conversation on The Prism of Torah.